It's that time of year again, and thank you for joining me one more time, or a first time if it's the first time that you've seen my year in review of our Vävstuga textiles. And I think we're going to start with what we've got here on the table right now. This is a pile of little tablecloths. Maybe some of you recognize these. This was our basics tablecloth, and it still is our basics tablecloth in the Vävstuga video class. And I had quite a bit of warp left over from 2019, actually 2020, when we put a lot of warp on for a lot of classes, and of course they were all canceled. I finally wove them all off. Look, here they are. Lots of tablecloths. They will become gifts of some sort, probably, but I did finally weave that warp off. And speaking of gifts, these might be gifts for Fabric of Life, which is our nonprofit organization that holds the Väv immersion class, which we'll talk more about in a bit. But I made other thank you gifts last year for Fabric of Life. I made a huge pile of those tablecloths and these little napkins, and also of these placemats. And we just have a few of these left. But actually the funny thing is I needed a few more. I was a few napkins short. And so Tanya very nicely put on a warp for me. I picked out all the colors. I almost picked out all the colors, but I got one of the colors wrong. But she put on a lovely warp for a nice lot more of these napkins. But I pulled one of the wrong colors. And then, what do I do with that? Well, I turned it into an opportunity. And so now this is for my sets class in Swedish classics. Let's look at these first. So these little napkins, well, those are little napkins. The edge is a little darker than the ones I just showed you, but that's set in a 30 dent reed. This is set in a 35 dent reed. See, they're a little smaller. And here's a 40 dent reed, a little smaller, and a 45 dent reed. These feel really wonderful and tight. And so just seeing what those different sets, feeling the way it feels, was fascinating. But on the same warp, I brought it even down to a, this was probably a 60 dent reed, 4 per dent, and woven with the cotylene, and then these two little rep coasters. Aren't they cute? And then another rep, the same warp again, spread out a little wider so you can see the weft through. It's more of an open rep. Using just the chunky yarn, you see these lines look different from those lines, because here I alternated the chunky yarn and the skinny, and so you mostly just see one of the two gold threads, and here you see both the gold threads equally back and forth. So just a different look. And then I decided to really push the envelope a bit and use what I call a curtain set on one of my set charts. And so I spread it out even wider. This must have been in a 20 dent reed because that's half of the 40, which is more my normal tight set. So I did a weft-faced, a little bit of a weft-faced band here. And so there are probably more picks in this space here than they are in the whole rest of the piece, because the rest of the piece is woven more loosely. But it's a ballast plain weave up here, and for this I made mountains and just had a longer weft to pack in to make it a weft face. So it was an interesting experiment. And so when people ask me, well, how do you set a certain yarn? It can be all over the map, of course. So experiment away. And in fact, we're going to start with looking at this tablecloth. And so this tablecloth is something that we tried out in 2020 for our so-called new in-person basics class. And we keep changing our minds about things, but this was a tablecloth we put in for one season. And we had tried out these napkins. And actually we opted for the tablecloth in the class, but it's kind of a nice set, don't you think? So there's a little napkin, gold and gray, and another gray. It's kind of muted neutral colors. What that meant we could do with these is have all of these variations. And there are a few variations there, but then with the leftover warp that we didn't use, we did multiples of these. Looks like a whole pile of purple ones, a whole pile of gold ones, and of bluey green ones. So these are all on the same warp, these pinky ones, and then some of those, purpley, bluey, greeny, and another kind of blue and gold combination. And so I have still a warp of tablecloths left to weave off. Maybe I'll get to show you those next year, and they'll go with the napkins. And so if you come here, maybe you'll be using some of these napkins at the table. So a bunch of new napkins. And then last year I showed some green towels, leftover basics warp from 2020. Again, we're finally finishing some of these 2020 warps. And here are the rest of the green towels. And we'll open one or two up. As this is the towel design that's in the Vävstuga Basics video class. And see, so those are the same warp. They have a very different look, of course, depending what weft you pick. And moving down the line of towels, this warp I put on last March, and it's a 6-shaft damask. It's actually 2 blocks of 3-shaft twill, a 2-1 twill. And I've got this little border at the bottom. The other blocks just show up down in the little border. I put this warp on many years ago for a linens class, and I wove some towels on it, but I didn't really quite have enough to use for a class. So I got a few more out of this warp. So now with smaller groups, we can bring these nice linen towels out for hand towels. And who knows, maybe one year I'll make a few more in other colorways. But for now, we've got 3 more colors. And towels. I think we've got some more towels here. Ooh, look at these. Here is our towel from the current basics class. We have a square one as an example that we've been using in class, but now we have a rectangular example too. Eva wove this one for us. And also, look at, there's a little band. This is a little band you learn how to weave on our Vävstuga band loom in the basics class. And that brings us to this end of the table. And these pieces are all from our most recent Väv immersion class, which was last April and May, I think into June a little bit. And this is a great 8-week program, residential. So if you want to delve in and just spend 8 weeks learning a lot of different things, here's just a little bit of an example of some of the warps that were left over that actually Eva got to weave this one off for us here. That's a deflected double weave towel on 8 shafts and 8 treadles. And here is a beautiful little towel with its hanger tab, of course. And then here's an overshot piece. So the example I have for overshot was a bit more complicated looking, but I decided to weave just the pattern as threaded, which I hadn't done before on this one. It just makes this diamond pattern. Same threading. I tried a whole lot of different treadlings using up leftover quills. and that way it gives people a pretty good example of how you can vary the treadling and make different patterns on the one warp. And then this is what I did with the leftover Smålandsväv warp from this last season. And then we had a bit of leftover upholstery fabric warp. So this is a wool weft. It's actually a wool and linen weft combined, a strand of 6-1 wool with a strand of 16-1 linen. And if you're using it for sewing, you don't want to tie in all the ends. So that's why I just carried it along the edge. This could be your nice pillow cover, bench, a bench cushion cover kind of thing. And the immersion folks also make these beautiful tow linen tablecloths, nice big ones. So These are just quite lovely, and I always have them put on enough warp so that Vävstuga gets one too. I still got some fuzzies to remove from this. I get an incomplete on preparation, but these will come off. Tape works well. Do you ever take fuzzies off with tape? That'll work quite well. And then this was a fun one. Some of these were, this one 2 students shared a warp, the other 2 were just one student's design, but the students designed these and we make them. And then Eli was here in a Väv immersion last spring, and he put on a very ambitious tablecloth warp, pulled it off, 2 very long tablecloths. I made a square on what was left of his warp, and I wove it with cotton, which is a little cheaty. It's a 16-2 cotton warp, and he wove 2 long ones with a 16-1 linen. So that was just a fun opportunity. So I'm very grateful for these opportunities of fabrics that other people set up, and then I get to weave a little bit. We have some more things here to pull out while we're on tablecloths. And one thing people can do here is they can come for a project class, and they pick a project. We have lots of projects on our website to pick from, and this is just one of them, a plain weave linen tablecloth. The student chose her own colors, and I got to weave one. And let's do these next. We're kind of going backwards a little bit, but not too much. These are nice big tablecloths. These were also thank you gifts for our Fabric of Life fundraiser last year. Not this most recent one, but the year before. And I offered for the very generous donors who could to make a large tablecloth and napkin set. And I guess I didn't pull the napkins out, but I do have some napkins that go with these. So that was 1 warp. I made 3 cloths on it, 1 for the donor and 2 for here, because it's nice to have these cotton tablecloths for our lunches. They just fit nicely on our outside round table. And I don't have so many that are this big. And so I now have a few more of these that we can put out for lunches. Plain weave tablecloths are nice. There's a tiny bit of warp left on one of these, and I played around with different weft colors, so it's just a funny little piece. But it's on, I guess it's on this same warp here. You almost don't recognize it because of the different colors. And then people came for projects last fall. Here is Mary Seeger's beautiful choice of colors for this monk's belt, going 2 ways. And so it's lovely to have one of those with us. Thank you, Mary. And then Debbie Turner chose to do this. She wove a white one. I put black in my pattern weft. It's very elegant with the golden bleached, but I used the black instead. So the dazzling overshot tablecloth, a big one. So that was a fun project. While we're on tablecloths, we're going to segue to Swedish Classics class. This last year in the summer and just a few weeks ago, I've been filming to put Swedish Classics class on video. So I'm working on a video class, a video version of my Swedish Classics class, in which we do a tow linen tablecloth. This one is hemmed and finished. This one is not, but I'm pulling them both out here. I left this one not completely hemmed because I needed to demonstrate it in the video. Maybe you'll see that later. And so this is unwashed, but this is the same warp, and it's a demonstration of using a different color weft to get a very different look to it. And then this is a monk's belt that I did. It's also part of our Swedish Classics class. This was using up leftover warp from a previous class. And then for the video, I did a little sampler here of which side. Let's look at this side. Of the different treadlings you can do with this sort of basic 8-shaft twill. And then this was the satin weave that I did for the video version of the Swedish Classics class. 16-2 cotton warp and a 16-1 linen weft. Colors both in the warp and in the weft. So that makes for a really fun satin runner. And what else have we got? I have a couple of draw loom pieces. This was on a warp that somebody had, I guess, year before last. I finally got to it. And it's just a simple cloth with just a border. I often put borders around a picture, but this one is just the border. I thought, well, why not do that? And then this was inspired by Lillamore's Damask and Opemta book. This is a design in that book by Winnie Pelson. This is really fun to be able to do a bit of that. There's still some of this warp left, so maybe next year you'll see what happens with that. I think we're going to go to this pile next. I might have shown one of these last year. I'm not sure why this is in the pile. Maybe it's just one more. This is a shadow weave or a log cabin warp that we've done in Monster Party. That same warp can be done as rep. This year we actually rethreaded the warps when they were left because we were experimenting with other possibilities. And then there's a little double weave. Same threading as this, just a different tie-up. And again, here, this is the same tie-up as the rep weave, but with different materials. And there is a way to make these streaks not be here. So we're experimenting with this still, but you can kind of see that shadow weave motif here is the same as this motif. And what else did we do? That same warp, weave it with colors. And here's a little double weave with colors, basically the same idea as that, but the colors make it look different. And this is all with one color, just showing the different blocks. It's probably the opposite on the other side. And then combining those two color ideas into a little runner. That's what this one was. And then with the Takate warp, the 3 blocks, even I made a bunch of new samples. Which side do we want to look at? I don't know. So new samples of changing the tie-up, different arrangement of blocks. So it's a different profile tie-up in all of these. And so that's really a fun class. The Monster Party shows you a lot about these blocks and how to combine them in different ways. And also the double weave, we've got new ideas about how to present that. So Monster Party's fun. And what have we got here? Another Monster Party piece. This is the lace weave. Oh, and those are goats. So that's a nice lace weave, 6 blocks, and that profile tie-up can change so that the pattern can do different things. Here's just 3 little goats, just because, or maybe they're bighorn sheep. Let's call them bighorn sheep. And last year we had such a wonderful 2 weeks with Monica Helene, who came to teach a rag rug class, 2 rag rug classes. There was an open rep one, and this is from the open rep, so you can see the color of the fabric here inside the rep. The warp threads in the rep are spaced out enough so you see the actual rags through and you get some of the beautiful colors. And here is another warp that we did in that class, 16-2 cotton. This was a fine reed, a very fine reed. But even so, the threads are far enough apart so you can see a little bit of the cloth. And here's the very same warp. And that goes to show you how much of the cloth, the rags in the weft, you see through. This was kind of a stripy cloth, so you can see a variated, it's like a variation in the coloring with that. It was really a wonderful class. This was another warp from that class. And again, you can see the rags showing through. So it's an open rep, meaning you see the weft quite a bit. And then this was on that same warp that we just looked at. And so, of course, the 2 sides are very different. We have the darker side and the lighter side. And we're very happy to have Monica coming back again this summer. The classes filled up pretty quickly, So hopefully we can have her come back again. And this was another project from Monica's class, a pillow cover. There's the back, here's the front. I have not sewn it together yet. But this is an inlay, so just a white rag here, but then an inlay of colored rags. And you can do whatever picture you want with that kind of technique. And they just float on top of the rag. So on the back, you don't really see so much of the inlay. You see more of it on the front. And that brings us to what? Let's go here next. In my design class this year, I came up with, I'll take it out of the plastic because it can be kind of glary. One of the ways we design is to do windings. And so I pick a color palette first, and then we do windings with this color palette. Of course, there can be so many different possibilities, but I decided to pick on this possibility right here. And I wanted to show some of the variety that you can do with one winding, starting with this runner actually for my basics class. This is going to be part of drafting class now. I wanted a new 3-1 straight twill runner to show people in class, so I'll use that. The same warp, I re-slayed it in a reed, in a wider reed. And so that made a nice little plain weave tablecloth. And then, is bigger better? Who knows? Here's a bigger of the same tablecloth. But then that one, we threaded up. I'm going to save this for last. We threaded it up to be halvdrel. And at first, I did a funny thing with my design and my papers, and Eva put this warp on, and we looked at it and said, well, it doesn't quite look like my paper. And we added more in the middle. So that has more stuff going on in the middle. So there's a plain weave tablecloth of that. And then this one was the halvdrel version. So on the same warp, it has a float pattern that I did in the black threads. But then we took out the extra stuff in the middle because I thought maybe I'd like it better that way. And I'm not even sure which side of this I like better. But this one, I liked this one better than that one. It's the way the middle turned out. And so that was kind of fun. This is something also that I do in my design classes. How do you overlay a block design on top of a plain weave plaid tablecloth? And so finally this winter, I had a little bit of time to play with that. And then, oh, and that brings us to yardage. So I'm currently working on a large piece of yardage. It's on a 150 centimeter loom, but how wide is it? It's 150, I don't know. It's quite a bit wider than the loom. And we're using a fly shuttle. And it's sort of an exciting piece of yardage. And that brings us to yardage, yes. Which I did last year before our draw loom classes started. I was testing out our new draw loom that we're still testing out, but it's a nice little draw loom. So this was a warp that I wound during a design class, I think the year before, a stripy warp. I just hold all the threads in my hand, like from here to here. And so I probably had 12 threads in my hand, and you just go up and down the mill and pick crosses in a way so that you don't have to cut and tie for all the little skinny stripes. It's just, I have all the threads in my hand at once. And it was fun doing this Opempta pattern on top of the stripe. And that's the nifty thing about this is that Opempta is time consuming, right? So mostly you just weave plain weave and then just a little bit of pattern here and there. And this piece of yardage, this was on my loom pre-COVID, and I finally wove it off. There's probably about 4 meters of this. And this was a fun combination of plain weave and twill. And I think the plain weave is set maybe half of what the twill was. So dense twill stripes. And I think it's a 3-1 twill. Take a peek at the back. No, wrong. just that it must be a 2-2 twill here and a plain weave there. And just some yarns that I've had on the shelf for a long time, so it feels good to finally get to things. And we had a lot of warp left over this year from our draw loom class, and we just pulled these off the other day. So there's one runner that I still have to hem, but it just literally came off the other day, as did these. This one is for my nephew. I made it to go with his dishes. He's having a housewarming party this Saturday, so just in time. And then here I did kind of a fun experiment. So these are all Opempta 19 pattern shafts. And so I just really wanted to play with all of these patterns, which I did. And so you can see here is a pattern, and then I did 30 shots of plain wave pattern, 30 shots of plain wave pattern, 30 shots of plain wave ad nauseum, all the way up to here. And it's pretty, but it's a little bit ad nauseum, except it looks like I screwed up there and did a bigger chunk, so don't look too hard. I just saw that for the first time. It happens. But this one, take a look at this. So there's the same pattern. I added this at the front, but there's the same pattern. There's the same pattern. There's the same pattern. There's the same pattern. And that's the same. But it's just the spacing is different. And it kind of makes it look like a whole different piece. And so again, for our design class, proportion is something we talk about a lot. I actually took a photograph as I was weaving the first one, and then I printed it out and cut it in little strips and arranged it in a kind of a different composition, and that's how I made this one. And then we have blankets. This is almost the grand finale of this year, because we still have bands after blankets. But we were using up a lot of leftover balls. I had a lot of leftover balls of yarn to use up, and I divided them into 3 color categories. And so there could easily be 30 different colors in each of these blankets, because we were just using up leftovers. And so that was fun. And then this blanket, this is from the immersion. So I'm going back to the Vev immersion class. There's someone that put an extra blanket on. And so I got to have one of these beautiful things. Thank you, Anne. And then these are very exciting. So we have a new line of wool in case you didn't know, a new line of blanket wool. And I did finally have a chance to put on a warp of 2 blankets. So I wove this one stripy, and just look at some of these colors. These colors are so rich and beautiful. And then this one I wove with a little bit of cross striping, so we can have a peek at that one too. And this yarn, it just folds up so beautifully. It makes such cuddly blankets, and yeah, you're getting a nice look at those rich colors. And then this little one was an experiment with using some of our new line of blanket yarn over here on this side. And this is the tuna yarn on that side. And it was to see, do these yarns combine? And they combine perfectly well. So you could mix and match from those 2 brands without any trouble. And so that was a fun experiment. And this is another blanket sample from our current basics class. If you come in person, you make one of these blankets, and every student has their own loom, and you can choose your own colorway. And since we've gone back to basics, these I've been using as samples in the basics class for our block damask. And the reason they're here is because I finally hemmed them. Took a few years, but now if you take a basics class, you'll see these hemmed instead of not. And you can see a lot of different colorways that go on the unbleached warp. There's one hiding under there. There we go. basics block weaves. And then the final group of things we have to show you are the band weaving of the year. And so we'll be right back with that. So this brings us to our bands portion of our show and tell from 2022 and a little bit into 2023. Last year during this video, I showed you a lot of bands that I was working on the Vävstuga band loom for a video class. And as of this last fall, I've decided to add to it working on a rigid heddle and also doing bands on a floor loom. So it's become a much larger project, but I'm so excited about it, and we are seeing light at the end of the tunnel. And so these are the rigid heddle bands that I have put into the video class. We can take a peek at them one by one. And these three here are from floor looms. I have some other floor loom ones as well, but they're still in process, so I couldn't bring them out for the video right now. The different kinds. This is plain weave, and this is a pickup band, and this one is just it's a treadled pattern, but it has floats with a patterned background. And let's see, how are we going to do this? You know, I think we're going to just start at this end of the table and go down. They're in a random order, and that is a rigid heddle with pattern slots. So we have the red pattern threads in these long pattern slots. And these are rigid heddles that are available in our store. And here's a different use of that same rigid heddle with these long slots. But it's just a very different use of it. It's a float pattern. It's quick and easy to weave, this one is. And here's a heddle with double holes. So we talk about that in the video class that's coming up. And this is a maybe unconventional use of it, this little band, but it's quick and easy to weave with this kind of heddle. And this one is probably a band that's a more traditional use of this double hole heddle. It's got a lot of color and pattern. It's a Sami band. And this one here, this is a very basic chevron. It's what I suggest to my students is a good way to start. And it's just a plain rigid heddle. The chevron is an easy pickup pattern. It's the same on the back. Very satisfying way to start out. And then this one is 11 pattern threads. And it's a really fun pickup band with these little hearts and some unusual motifs. That's a pattern I collected a long time ago in Sweden that I've finally woven now for the first time. And this one is a rigid heddle that I made at my school in Sweden back in 1982 when some of us went back for a reunion, had a weekend class in equipment making. And here's a little simple kind of pickup band on that one. And here is just a plain weave band. So this is what I'm going to start people out with in my video class for bands, just basic use of the rigid heddle. This one is also a plain weave band, but this one was not designed ahead of time. This one was just designed on the fly. It's even got some gaps in the heddle that aren't used, but it doesn't really matter. It was threaded without even a cross. It was just a wad of threads. So I show you how to do that in the video. Stay tuned to our newsletter. And this one is another design I collected a long time ago in Sweden. This is using one of these really big rigid heddles. There's some certain technique to using these wide ones, so I'm going to go over that in detail for you. And here's another one with pattern slots, a little wider than the ones we saw at the first end of the table. So it's just got more threads, a bit of a wider band, and so this has been really fun putting the band weaving video together. It's turned into a very big project, but we're nearing the end. Stay tuned if you like bands. It's coming up. Oh, you know, we didn't talk about this one here. This was an interesting one out of an Estonian band book. It's got 6 shafts and 6 treadles. You do weave it on a floor loom, and it zips right along, but look at all of that intricate pattern. And so thank you so much for joining me this year. And if you didn't see videos from past years, they're all on our YouTube channel and in our old newsletters in the winter sometime or summer sometime. It varies, but you'll find them. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to meeting you if you ever have a chance to come here in person.